All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Sunday night, welcome all Rhode Island beekeepers. My name is Scott Langlis. I'm the president. For those of you who don't know me, I know we probably have some new bee school attendees probably tuning in for the first time. Uh, this is my second term as president. I've been keeping bees. I think I'm going into my 12th season right now, so I'm still a newbie essentially. I'm also an EAS master beekeeper. And I want to welcome all you guys. I know I don't see a ton of people with cameras on, but anybody here enrolled in bee school? Want to just raise your hand? Piggy, I see you. Andrea, Tina, that's your names on the screen, whatever your actual names are. Well, welcome. I spoke briefly at the beginning of one of Steve's classes. Probably some of you are enrolled in Betty's classes, which haven't started yet. Obviously, this is a brand new frontier for RIBA. We've never had online classes before. Obviously, you know why we're moving to this, but it's something that we think is probably going to continue even after, we can do live meetings again, because people enjoy being able to go back, rewatch videos, take things on, their own schedules. I know for us, we always kind of blocked out that Sunday at 2 p.m. for our meetings. That doesn't always work for everyone. So this kind of gives us a little bit of flexibility. So I know me personally, I don't love Zoom. I prefer to see all you guys, in person, see you wince at my bad jokes. I can see that in real time rather than try to interpret it through a computer screen. But there is value, and I think we're going to continue it even as an auxiliary.
Scott speaking.
Live meetings again. So I want to say this is January, so this is the start of a new year. I want to introduce 2021 Executive Board. I'm not sure who's on here right now. As I stated earlier, I'm your president, Scott Langlis. Our vice president, Sarah Michaud. Our secretary, Stephen Burke. Treasurer is Jennifer Bristol. Member at large, Kevin Kennedy. Again, our elections just happened at the end of November. First time for us. It was all online. Went very smoothly. No hiccups. We're pleased that we can kind of keep operating even in this kind of weird, gray area that we're in the world right now. But those are your elected officers. If you need their contact information, find them on ribkeeper.org. I don't have a ton of club business I want to transact before we bring on our speaker, but I do want to mention one thing. We have made the decision to freeze dues for 2021. We looked at the club's finances. We know a lot of people are maybe in dicier financial straits right now than normal. And we didn't want, paying your dues to be, an added item of stress for you potentially. So we made the decision we can kind of just take a freeze on that for this year. Anyone who, whether you're on our books in any way, shape, or form, your dues are paid for all of 2021. If you had already sent in dues for the year, we've rolled it over for next year. So you're good for another year. There is a note on the website because I've been asked, and we've gotten some payments even since this freeze from people who still want to make what I'm going to call a donation. They want to pay their dues anyway, even though we're not requiring it, to help offset the people that aren't paying. We will accept that with gratitude, and that's awesome. I don't have a full list of the people who have done that, partially because I don't know if they want to be recognized publicly or not. But trust me, we're very grateful to anyone who wants to make that voluntary dues payment. It's not required, but we appreciate it. A couple other thank yous I want to read. We just had our elections. Someone who's been a board member for the last 10 years, Dr. Jane Dennison. I know a lot of you guys are going to be very familiar with her. She's been on the board as member at large for the last 10 years. She's also served as our EAS representative. For those of you who took part in the Queen Grant that we ran a couple of years ago, Dr. Jane was really instrumental in the successful execution of that, doing all the organizing, distribution of queens. I mean, it was such a monumental task, something that, even my role at the time in the board, like I wanted nothing to do with it because it was like so much work and such a horror show, but she really did it with, such ease and grace, hosting meetings at her home, writing prescriptions for people for EpiPens. As a doctor, she gave us that unique perspective from an actual medical professional on, topics of anaphylaxis, the healing properties of honey. And after 10 years, she just decided that, she didn't need to be on the board, but she's still going to be, we hope, involved in the club in some way, shape, or form. But after 10 years, believe me, you've earned a little bit of rest. So I want to extend, a really warm thank you from the club to her, if she's listening here or not. A couple other thank yous. Tom and Glenn at Cedar Lane. Again, with our dues freeze, they wrote to me, asked if they could make, a financial donation as kind of like a way to offset some of that. Really nice, really unexpected. I want to recognize those guys. They do so much for the community in Rhode Island, hosting people down at Tom's place in West Greenwich, the videos they put on, they're posting, and just being a local supplier who is willing to stand by their products and give you good advice. They're not just trying to sell you something. They're there to help you and stand by what they do. They've also agreed to donate a nuke for one, can be raffled off to one of the B classes. We still haven't figured out exactly how it's going to go, but I wanted to thank them. And then finally, one of our members, Brian Wood, he contacted me a few months ago. He said he does this thing every year where he does a raffle of honey and hive products that, that he produces himself, kind of just for friends, and gives the proceeds to a charity. And he wanted to donate it to RIBA. Again, just so unexpected and so generous. It raised almost $300. All that money is, by his request, was rolled right into our library fund for this year. So that basically paid for all the new library books that we're adding to the collection this year. I mean, what an awesome gesture. I wanted to publicly recognize him. Brian Wood, if you're on, thank you again. That brings us to the library. We have a bunch of new books. They're being cataloged right now. They were dropped off recently. Our collection is over 110 unique titles. There are some that have multiple titles. If you're anywhere in Rhode Island, you have a valid library card, you can search the Ocean State Library database, and have those books sent right to your local branch. So you don't have to go to Greenville. If you're on Newport, Tiverton, wherever, you can get them sent right to your local branch. It's a great collection. We've really made an effort to bring in the newest, all the newest books, the best books, but also some really time-honored classics. It's a great collection. There's stuff you're never going to find anywhere else in the library system. That was kind of my goal at the beginning. Was I was looking for books on queen rearing. Our speaker today, Dan Conlon, several years back, I went to a queen rearing workshop at Warm Colors Apiary. Was run by Larry Connor. Started getting involved in a little small scale queen rearing. I said, I want to learn more about this. I went to the library, give me a book on queen rearing. There's been tons of them written. There wasn't a single book in the entire Rhode Island library system on queen rearing. You go there now, search the RIBA collection. There's like 10 or 8 or 10 books just on queen rearing. Wax, mead, you name it, any topic, Langstroth, Warre hives, top bar hives, disease, pest control, everything, it's in there. Really great resource. So check that out if you guys haven't already. And finally, we do have a board meeting coming up. It's going to be this Wednesday at 6 p.m. I can post the link on Facebook, or you can email me directly if you want it. All our board meetings, our executive board meetings, are always open to the public, to our members. You're welcome to join us. It's not a practical beekeeping meeting. We're not going to be talking about how to winterize your hives. get them ready for spring, anything like that. But if you want to talk about the business of the club, if you have business that you want to bring in front of the club, you're welcome to join us. It will be obviously through Zoom. And again, you can contact me. My contact information is on the website, ribkeeper.org. And with that, I'm going to wrap this up. It took me just about 10 minutes, much briefer than I can usually be, as you guys know. Our speaker today, Dan Conlon. Dan spoke to us, I believe the last was our winter 2018 banquet. Gave us a great talk. He spoke to us a number of times. He just spoke to Norfolk County earlier this month, a great talk on Queens. Dan, are you currently still the president of the Russian Queen Breeders Association?
I'm now the vice president.
Okay.
As of our meeting, we had our annual meeting. I did my stint and switched with the treasurer.
Okay. So I tried to look up your bio earlier, and I thought the Russian website still listed you as president, but I wasn't 100% sure. But
we're not that technically advanced. It takes us a while to get the things online. So
I know the feeling. I could read Dan's bio. It would take me the rest of the hour. I mean, he's won so many awards and accolades. If you saw the email I sent out with the invitation, it's got a few of them on there. But I'm not going to embarrass him by running this down. We had a brief survey at the end of the year asking what kind of meetings you guys want, and overwhelmingly the respondents said we want a mix of not only science but hands-on beekeeping. So Dan this is not an egghead. This is not a poser. This is a real deal. Get your hands dirty. Get out in the bee yard, beekeeper. He knows what's up. I know you're going to enjoy it. Always learn a lot and enjoy his talk. So without further ado, Dan Conlon.
All right. Thank you, Scott. It's good to see you, even though we're long distance. And I want to thank Ed for arranging all these things. He's been advising me on how to stay online and not push the wrong buttons, which I think has been a challenge. But anyway, tonight's talk, and by the way, I'm sure some of you are my friends, and I'm sorry I can't see you, but I've always enjoyed. Oh, there's one now. There's Ed now. But I've enjoyed my visits to Rhode Island over the years. I've been down to your meetings and talked maybe 3 or 4 different occasions, and always have a good time. So sorry we can't be doing this in person. Anyway, I'm going to talk tonight about honey production. I think sometimes we don't spend enough time on this. In the old days, before we had all these problems all the time, it seemed like everybody was always talking about the honey production. And I'm going to try to offer you some of the tips. And you're actually a good group to do this with. Can you see that?
You got to share your screen down the bottom.
Okay, hold on here.
Green button at the bottom of your screen.
Yeah, I seem to have Oh, Ed, how can I get my screen down?
I don't know what you mean by that.
Well, I don't seem to have any. I don't have a. Hold on. Okay, share screen.
There you go.
That work?
Yes.
Okay, so sorry, everybody. This is why I would prefer to do this in person. Okay, anyway, so we'll talk a little bit about the art of producing honey. And like we often talk with beekeeping, there's a lot of science to it, but a lot of it kind of gets down to just sort of reading all the indicators and adapting as you go. I think it's one of the things that makes beekeeping both interesting and probably is most challenging because you rarely have the same season repeat itself. A good example is the last 2 years for us. And I'm sure we have similar experiences with honey production, but 2019, we never had a dearth. We were pulling honey the entire summer. And our biggest problem was keeping enough empty comb hives to get as much of the honey as we could. And the second problem we were having is keeping the hives open enough so we didn't lose bees to swarming. In 2020, we had a terrible dearth here of honey due to the drought we had all summer. And might have been my worst season ever was this past year. So, with the bees, it might have been one of the best years I had for keeping up with all the chores, but that's how the seasons run. Anyway, just a quick note on bee-friendly farming. Some of you are probably familiar with this whole thing, but you know, we try to do these things. We try to lower the risk to our bees. And I'm not just talking about pesticides, I'm talking about all the other things that might be encountered in the course of a season, not exposing them to diseases, to other people's diseases, being careful with sanitation, all those kind of things. We've really stepped up our work with nutrition in bees because we realize so much of good nutrition ends up being about improved health, better immunities, more tolerance, stronger colonies, all those things, all very important. We strive to have no mites, but of course we all have mites, but we strive to keep the mite levels low. We try to keep the nosema out. We've been fortunate in recent years not to have much of nosema at all in our testing and haven't seen any real symptoms of it. We work hard to have really high quality queens in as many of our hives as we can. It's one reason we raise so many queens so that we can be more particular. We pay attention to genetics. All of our breeds is tested by the Baton Rouge Bee Lab annually so that we know what we're getting and we know that we're staying on track for some of the indicators, genetic indicators or markers, as they would say, that tell us that these bees are better against mites and disease. And we strive not to use chemicals in the operation. We will use mite treatments when we need to for our production colonies, but our test colonies, we always select from those that are surviving on their own. We think that's the only way you can honestly improve the stock is to work with bees that survive on their own. So that's some of the bee-friendly comments. So tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about what honey is, then how bees produce the honey. We'll talk about the beekeeper's part in this, and I'm going to go through some of the plants. And then I want to just talk a little bit about things you might pay attention to when you're harvesting the honey. And if we have time, I have some slides of some big commercial operations just to give you an idea of what happens when the scale increases significantly. So anyway, what is honey? Well, we know it's nectar from flowers. It's not honey yet, it's the nectar. And that's really a sugar in liquid. It also has enzymes, has other things, some solids, some other things in it. The flowers themselves are designed to attract pollinators. We refer to that as having nectar guides. And these actually the colors and the shapes are attractive to different types of pollinators, but these nectar guides are really key. Think of it this way. Humans and pollinators share the same experience with flowers. We like the smells and we like the looks of them. And that's exactly what happens with plants. They put these out to attract the bees and other pollinators. Nectar has to be ripened. It's not honey. It's not honey until the bees have worked on it. So it's actually a food that the bees produce. And they take basically complex sugars, sucrose primarily, and they break it down into more simple sugars such as glucose and fructose, which of course is what our bodies run our muscles and brain on. And available nectar is always going to be dependent on weather conditions and the amount of forage you have available in any given area. And the quality of the honey is really going to depend on the type of plant it came from, the primary source, and also how you as a beekeeper handle it. We know that the composition of honey is about 85% sugar or sugars, because there's about 22 other types of sugars in honey, maybe even more. But the glucose and the fructose is primarily what we end up with as the dominant sugars after the enzymes have been added by the bees. Plus there'll be some solids and some other types of sugars as well. Honey contains more fructose. It's less likely to crystallize. You see that in your Tupelo and your sourwood honey. It's one of the reasons they're so prized. And they will go 10 years without granulation. And I know that for a fact, because I once bet Bob Cole that his sourwood honey would granulate. And I owed him a $5 bill every year at the EAS that it didn't granulate. And I think I gave up after I paid him for 8 years. So it's had to settle with him at that point. But it's those types of honeys. Then of course we have the goldenrods, the asters, which are common around here, and they do tend to be higher in glucose, and they tend to crystallize a little more quickly. Canola or rapeseed oil that produces rapeseed oil, canola oil from Canada. They grow a lot of that up there. Their honey granulates in a week. It's a tough honey to work with. So anyway, that's a quick lesson in that. Plant nectar to honey. Well, as I said, it's a sugary liquid, and it's secreted by the nectaries in the plants. And it's, it's really the carbohydrate that the bees use. When they turn it into honey, that's what the adult bees are going to power themselves with. That's their energy. They collect the nectar, and it's actually a response. And this is going to be part of what I want to point out to everybody about producing more honey, is it's a response to the pheromones in the brood nest. And also it's a response to having open comb. And so one of the things you want to keep in mind when you're trying to produce more honey is to have drawn comb that's empty and have brood nests that have a lot of larvae in them, because that's going to stimulate the bees to forage better and more. If you have neither of those things, it's going to slow down considerably, although we have found that when we produce comb honey, we like to sometimes cage the queen for 2 weeks, which helps with the mite control, but it also puts more bees on the forage, and they tend to put up more honey quicker. And that's really key to producing comb honey. The ripening, and one of the things I always keep in mind is when you talk about colony growth, you really need a cell of honey and a cell of pollen to get one bee. So that means you need 2 frames of food to get 1 frame of brood. So keep that in mind. When people work for me, I teach them that whenever we see a colony with less than 3 capped frames of honey and 3 frames of pollen, consider those hives starving, especially in the spring, because they will consume that rather quickly. The scouts are sent out early in the morning. They take samples. They come back to the hive. They recruit more workers for the workforce. And as most of us know, they communicate a lot of detail, such as the actual location by dancing. And that signals, and they'll repeat that over and over until they recruit enough workers to harvest that crop of flowers. The foragers will then go out, they gather that nectar. As they draw that nectar up, it goes inside their abdomen, where the honey stomach is, which is a big bladder that fills up with this nectar. And in the process, there's glands that release invertase or enzymes that start the process of changing that complex sucrose sugar into the fructose and glucose. They also add a little bit of hydrogen peroxide type material in order to prevent it from spoiling, because nectar left alone will ferment or produce funguses and things rather quickly if it doesn't. So they actually put something in it to temporarily preserve it until it gets back to the nest for ripening. When they go to the door of the entrance to the hive, they switch off with the house bees. They give the nectar to the house bees. Then they go back out to get another load of nectar into wherever they're storing the honey. They start the ripening. They add more enzymes. They evaporate the excess moisture out of the honey till they get it down below 18%. And then they cap it. And that's when you know the honey is cured or ripened. And they tend to store it around the brood nest. So that's one of the things when you are pulling honey, one of the reasons that works overhead is that they will only go up to a certain point, and then the brood nest is only going to be a certain size, no matter how many bees, how good the queen is. And above that, you're going to have honey. So the bees and the nectar. Workers, they, as I said, they'll go out and identify the nectar sources. And this is really key. You can do this just in the morning in the summer if you have time. Go out right as on a warm morning with a cup of coffee and just watch your bees for about an hour as the daylight comes up, and watch for those early bees that go out, and you'll see them come back, and you can kind of recognize them for a couple of reasons. They go out and they'll be gone about a half an hour. They come back, and one of the things they do that other workers won't do is you sometimes see mixed colors in the pollen they gather. And what they're doing is they're just taking samples, they bring it back to the nest, and they're going to get the workforce motivated to go harvest this stuff. But they go out and they just fly a big circle wider and wider around the hive, and they identify pretty much everything that's blooming that day. And that's how they get started. Then you'll see the foragers, the main worker foragers, go out in bigger numbers. As the day progresses, it'll get more active. If it's really active, you know you got a good nectar flow on. And as I said, the nectar is then transferred to the house workers, who then cause that evaporation of moisture and get it below 18%. When honey gets below this level of 18% or less, it's a very stable food. It won't support bacteria or funguses or things that might spoil it. It won't ferment. As long as the cappings are kept on, it can be held that way for quite some time. Anyway, that's also what you're looking for before you harvest honey. This is a picture. I don't know where I got this. I've used this picture for 20 years. I just think it's one of the best ones. The bees have an electrostatic charge on them that actually causes the pollen to stick to their hair or the plumose of their bodies. And when they land in the next flower, it discharges and a lot of that pollen falls off. And that's how this pollination process really works. No one really thinks the bees deliberately are out there moving pollen around because they know the plants will benefit from it, but they will pack a bunch of it on their hind leg like this bee to take back, and they'll use that to make that they will feed to the larvae. And it's really critical that they have highly nutritious pollen. So you will see bees gather different colored pollens at the same time, and you will see them bring in a lot of different variety from different flowers. And that's part of one of those mysteries of the bees, is they have such good ability to get what they need. Anyway, that proboscis, or the tongue, is a 3-flapped organ that actually can be pushed together and used as a straw to stick down in those nectaries and draw up that nectar, liquid nectar, and then they would store it. And in their abdomen, as that bladder fills up to haul this stuff, all of their internal organs flatten out against the walls of their abdomen. So they are amazing creatures, and they probably are the most why we call it the Swiss Army knife of insects. I think you could say this of one of nature's model insects for this purpose, harvesting pollen and nectar from flowers and transporting it. They have all the equipment they need right on their bodies, and they will use their antenna for scent to find the flowers. They tend to work the same flowers until that flower is done, which makes them ideal for pollination. And a good strong beehive with 40,000 bees is pretty unequaled if it's a flower they like as far as pollination goes. So that's one reason we use them a lot for our commercial farms and so forth. As I said earlier, the flowers are there to attract the pollinators. And although humans share a lot of the same appreciation of a beautiful flower, these are really food enticements for the pollinators. And the nectar and pollen is all that bees really need to survive. Pollen is thought to have all the vitamins and minerals and essential oil or essential enzymes, amino acids, and so forth that that even humans need, with the exception of vitamin K. And so it's a highly nutritious source of food, and it's about 30% protein. And it will vary from different pollens. Not all pollens are equal, but the bees tend to know the better nutritional foods to go after. The various scents can be very different on flowers, as you all know. Some scents are designed to attract flies. You won't see bees on certain flowers. Rhododendrons, mountain laurel, those types of flowers are actually toxic to the honeybee. You'll see bumblebees on there because they've adapted and evolved with those plants, but the honeybees, you won't see too many try those. And there are certain plants they just don't want to visit. The color and shape, as I said, provide nectar guides. When we get into being the beekeepers, well, what do we need to do? Number one, we want strong colonies, and we want these colonies peaking right before your nectar flow starts. And that, of course, means that as a beekeeper, one of your first assignments is to start recording when things bloom in your area, and if possible, try to identify what those flowers are blooming. I always have found that to be kind of one of the fun parts of being a beekeeper, is I've always enjoyed learning about the plants. And some of the best beekeepers I know are also pretty good botanists. I mean, they know a lot about plants, and they understand that the relationship between honeybees and plants, each is so dependent on the other. It's a form of mutualism. I think that's what the scientists would call it. But they both benefit. The plants benefit from the pollination. The bees benefit from getting all the food. You need drawn comb. Probably one of the unfair things to brand new beekeepers is you guys just don't have the drawn comb. And it's very hard to stay, if you put foundation supers on, which you will have to start, by the time they've drawn any of that comb, the honey flow is usually gone by. So your first year is going to be trying to get more comb. And it's also one of the things, as I always say to people, you can buy almost anything associated with beekeeping, but drawn comb, not too many of us are going to part with the good stuff. It took us too long to build up our surplus supers. In our operation, we've been running about 1,000 colonies, and we probably have 2,500 or 3,000 supers with drawn comb. And believe me, I consider that the most valuable thing I own. So when wax moths or something else get into these things, those are the days you'll see me with a tear in my eye, because I know how much work it was to get that. And it also means it's going to be harder to harvest that honey. Harvest your honey frequently. I always chuckle. People love to come and show me their 10-box stacks of bees. And I just chuckle because I don't know why you would do that, first of all. I guess it looks pretty impressive, but to a guy who actually produces honey for a living, I think if you have 3 good supers per hive, that's all you need. And you want to harvest these frequently. And what I mean by that, you want to pay attention when the nectar flows are on. And in our area, which I think is similar for Rhode Island, it tends to be mid-May. You guys might be a little earlier, although it seems to me you guys get some pretty rough weather down there that we miss in the winter. But the mid-May to the end of June is the major honey flow for us in Western Mass. And if we have overwintered colonies that are strong and on top of it, that is usually where we produce the most wildflower honey, along with some of the varietals. We have a second honey flow or nectar flow, and that's usually in August. And it's when the goldenrod kicks in. You'll see the goldenrod start, and we like to have empty supers on again. And we'll always harvest some of the goldenrod, but we often leave a good portion of that for them for the winter. We also get a lot of knotweed, Japanese knotweed, which is, it may not be good for a lot of things, but the bees sure like it, and it produces a lot of dark honey. And it's not a bad tasting honey, so we have more and more customers interested in it. So you want to be prepared to put supers on ahead of that, or right before you see it when it first starts. We'll talk about that in a second. And don't get greedy with your bees in the fall. One of the mistakes I think that gets taught sometimes is you can take the honey and just feed back sugar syrup instead, and it's not really the same thing. It's the old like feeding them Wonder Bread. Nutritionally, it just doesn't have what they need. Some syrup is fine, and in the beginning when you're building a hive, you don't have a lot of choices, because you never want to feed other people's honey to your bees, because it may have disease. And until you can leave honey from your own bees on them, you're gonna be feeding them syrup, but it is not your best option. It really isn't. And then you're gonna, in the fall, you're gonna harvest the honey, extract it. And I heard Scott mention renting the extractor. Well, that's great that you guys have that available, because that's an expense I think most beekeepers really don't need to make, especially if you can rent one, because you're going to probably extract once or twice in the summer for most of you, unless you have quite a few hives. The harvest for us, we are always looking for the bees to have the comb completely capped or 3/4 of it capped. We want it to be as ripe as possible before we harvest it. And we use bee escapes or escape boards. We don't like to use chemicals there's chemicals, bee robber, things like that you can put this smelly stuff on a board, and as it heats up, it repels the bees out of the supers. But I can tell you that you might just find that taste in your honey too. So I'm real wary of that. We're trying to produce the best honey possible, and that's the last thing I want to do, is ruin a crop of honey by having bad flavors in it. Be careful when you smoke the bees. Don't over smoke them. It's possible to smoke bees out of the supers, but it's also possible to leave ash in there and smoky taste in the honey. So you want to do these things very carefully and try to protect your honey as best you can. Don't leave it uncovered, because you might get robber bees in there, and once you have a bee yard with robbing, you'll know what I mean. It's just a lousy situation. So protect your honey, keep something over it. It's good to have a heavy piece of wet cloth or something you can just drape over it in between and keep it all covered. The extracting process, I'll show you some pictures in a few minutes. And you want to package, your honey with care too. You don't want to overheat it. If you're going to warm it to get it into jars, which you'll find you almost always have to, be careful not to go above 100 degrees. Keep the heat low. This is our quick timeline. In February, that's when your queens will probably be laying eggs if you're looking. We use Russian bees, so ours are a little different than, say, Italians. But all bees kind of do the same things. They just do them a little different schedules. Russians and Carniolans are kind of similar in the way they behave. We think Russians have some of those genetics from way back when, 120 years back. Anyway, the queen will resume egg laying, and that's important. And one of the things I just want to point out to everybody is that you want to see a lot of fall pollen in your hives going into the winter, because that's what your bees are going to really build up on. It isn't going to be all this stuff that you feed them once the weather warms up. It's going to be this stuff. It's going to be the bee bread that's made up with fall pollen. And having frames of that around the brood nest are going to be critical to how many new bees you're getting. And it's in the spring, that's what the bees have to do. They have to replace the old and dying bees in the hive from winter with young, new bees. And it'll start with just a small patch, a few hundred new bees at a time. And the expansion will really be dependent on having a good critical mass of workers left over, and also plenty of pollen in the frames and honey left from the previous fall. So pay attention to that when you're putting your bees to bed in the fall. And if you have that, you still probably want to give them a shot or two of sugar syrup, and that's and keep it. It doesn't have to be you're not feeding them necessarily with that, but it will stimulate them to think in terms of that there's nectar coming in, and when there's nectar coming in, that triggers that response to go gather more pollen and nectar out in the field. So it's going to also encourage them to raise more brood than they might otherwise. In April, you'd continue to feed. You get your equipment ready, any of those supers that you have or anything. Maybe you're adding boxes, maybe you're expanding, maybe you're putting nukes in or packaged bees. Whatever you're doing, you're going to do that. You're going to have that ready for April. In May, what we like to do is all the overwintered hives is we like to go through and equalize the brood. And what I mean by that is we take a survey. We go through and see which hives are doing well. In other words, brooded up, and we will count the brood frames. How many frames of cap brood do we have? Usually with the Russians in mid-May, until we put them on apples and fresh flowers, they tend to hold back a little bit. So we do this, but we are getting ready for pollination, fruit pollination, and we're also equalizing them so we can measure the quality of those overwintered queens. And what I mean by that, and you would also equalize the honey to make sure everybody has enough honey. And we do all of that just so we don't have to feed them or put as much work into it. With 1,000 hives, you're always trying to do things efficiently and not have to come back. So we try to set them up in May to get them into June. Now, we then mid-May, they go out to apples, and apples are a great stimulant for queens, especially these Russians. So when they come out of apples after 7 or 10 days, we will see just frame after frame of eggs having been laid. And that's how quickly they respond. And that's one of the reasons, if you work with Russian bees, you need to be aware that they do build up, because you will, 3 weeks from there, you're going to see all these bees hatching out or emerging, and you're going to have swarm conditions then. And that's where they get the reputation as being swarmy. They just get ahead of the beekeeper, and then the beekeeper's not happy with that. June, we would harvest our first capped honey. Sometimes, by the way, we will get apple honey during apple pollination, but it's really hit or miss. Apple pollination can be tricky. The good news for growers is they really need just one good day at about 75 degrees sunny with low wind conditions. And if you've put the right number of hives out and they're in good strength, the bees will pollinate all of that early bloom that the growers are after in one day. So they need one day out of that to get a good crop. But as far as getting honey from apples, you kind of need all 7 or 10 days of good bloom. And then the honey is somewhat limited. We always have some, but it's a varietal that's a little more rare. Typically where we are in July, we have a dearth period. That is, the nectar flow slows down. We know it almost immediately because the bees are suddenly getting really hot and hanging out in the front of their hives. That's when we would do splits, make up some additional nukes, that kind of thing. And what we're really doing is we're decongesting the brood nest by taking brood out and using that brood in other hives or to create new hives. August, we prepare for the fall nectar flow, which is going to be that goldenrod, knotweed, aster run. We like to pull the goldenrod. We're going to pull when the bloom is about 80% done. What I don't like to do is to pull honey after all the flowers are done, because if any of you have done that, you might note that that's when the bees tend to be the nastiest. They are not happy when the bloom is finally cut off. So you don't want to do it after your first hard frosts, or you could leave it till it's really a cold day and the bees have all gone into the brood to keep it warm. And sometimes you can go out and just work in your flannel shirt and pop your honey supers off the top with very few bees to worry about. But I would tell you, just be paying attention to that. The other thing is we like to keep the knotweed and the goldenrod separate, because a little bit of knotweed will turn all your beautiful goldenrod dark. It'll still taste like goldenrod, but those customers who like the goldenrod honey are going to tell you, oh, this isn't real goldenrod. Doesn't look right. And so we try to separate them. September, you'd remove any of the remaining surplus honey. And then October, we'd like to have our hives pretty much winterized or ready for winter by then, just in case we get an early winter, which we don't see too much lately. Anyway, pussy willows. We have a lot of those around us because we have wetlands. A great source of early pollen. You'll see we have skunk cabbage. Doesn't sound too appealing, but remember, most of the stuff bees get in the early spring isn't going to be anything you ever see. They're going to use it to raise brood, and they're going to consume everything they bring in. But skunk cabbage, you'll see them go after the pollen on that. You get a lot of trees that you would maybe not think about, like sugar maple. They have flowers. The bees do visit them. Things like poplars, they'll visit those. The red oaks. There's quite a variety of spring trees that will bloom, and you will see bees on some of these things. If you're fortunate enough to have neighbors who grow lots of crocus and early bulbs and things, you'll see the bees on those as well. So any spring flowers that come in April are really a huge advantage to any good location. I'm not going to go through that again. Okay. So anyway, this is the kind of hives we would like to see every year. This was 2003, which by the way was one of our record years. We've been typically, averaging about 30,000 pounds of honey a season. And back in 2003, I think I had 350 hives, and we did almost that much with 350 hives. Now we have 1,000 hives, and we struggle to get to that number. So, either my beekeeping's gotten worse or something else has changed. But we were also running in those days 3 deeps for the brood nest. These hives got pretty massive, and I don't do that as much as we used to. You'll see on that also, you can see a queen excluder in there, and on the top 3 boxes, those are honey supers. So that year, I think we averaged almost 75 to 80 pounds per hive out of those hives or more. And we had some, I think they were up as high as almost over 200 pounds. So we had quite a banner year that year. And you don't see those come along that often, but when they do, it's pretty impressive. And it's always exciting when those things happen. So this coming year might be that year, so be ready for that. We like queens that are second season queens. They require a little attention because if they're any good, they're going to reach swarming ability. So you want to pay attention to them. But we also know that those queens are going to brood up really nicely starting in February, and they're going to have big brood nests, which means you have lots of workers. And our goal is 40,000. If you listened to my talk last time, I think I mentioned that Clarence Collison, and I hope he's the one who told me this because I always give him credit for this. I'd hate for him to call me and say, Dan, what do you keep talking about? I didn't say that to you. But what I was told was that when you reach a point where you have about 17,000 workers in the hive, that is all the bees you'll ever need, no matter how many boxes you've got on that hive. In other words, that's the maximum size. And it's because the brood nest is only going to be so big. And then once it reaches that point, that's all it ever takes to maintain it. So once you get past 17,000, you start having the rest turn into foragers either earlier. So if you have 40,000 workers, you've got about 23,000 that are going to be foragers. And that's a lot of bees out in the field in the daytime bringing in nectar. So anything over a box of bees, then you're going to be in good shape. So it's going to contribute to the yield. You don't want any swarms. If you lose a swarm, hopefully you catch it, but even so, it's going to affect your honey production. And it's also, a fact of life that when there's a really great nectar flow on, that's when the bees want to swarm because they like to swarm when there's plenty of food out there and they've got huge populations of young bees in the hive. So what we like to do is we will go through and pull out frames of capped brood to slow down that buildup because we've got enough bees to do the foraging and we don't want them to fly the coop on us, halfway through the honey flow. And we will sometimes, even change queens during that time just to slow up the process, remove some of those eggs and temporarily, of course. And you want to have extra storage in the combs. I have a good friend who's a third generation honey producer. And I worked for him in my younger years, and he taught me a whole lot about the honey production. But it was one of the things that's always stuck in my mind is he said, when bees bring in nectar, about the maximum they'll do in a day is 20, 25 pounds of nectar. And then they stop, and then they start to process that nectar through the night into the next day. And if you use scales, I think you'll find that to be a true statement. We've looked at that over the years, and it does seem to be that way. Maybe it's different in places like Canada where they get longer days or something, but they do need time. They do need time to process the nectar. One of the things I will say though, is you see the three supers there. If you have a wet summer, you want to have more supers on than fewer. And the reason for that is that the nectar may be more watery and require more space to temporarily store it. And the bees will put the watery nectar into the cells and then they'll evaporate it and they'll combine it until they fill up a cell. But you might get 3 boxes full of nectar during the day, and by morning you might have 1 box. And that happens all the time. A lot of people who are new to this will always say to me, geez, Dan, I had a whole box of honey and I saw them working on it and stuff. And now I looked a week later and I've got 3 frames. Well, that's what's happened. They've condensed it down into a smaller space. And that's what bees like to do. It's in their nature. Anyway, this was also 2003. And I like showing these pictures for a couple of reasons. One is that it was a really nice year, and I like to be reminded that it was a nice year. But also the paint on most of my hives was fresher, so it looks nicer. This is what you like to see you pop the lid on a hive and you want to see bees all the way up through the top, that's a deep box on top. I don't usually use deeps. At one time, when I was a lot younger, we would run deeps for everything. But a deep, when it's full of honey, is going to be 80 or more pounds per box. And if you've ever had the privilege of working in a bee yard where you're pulling 80-pound boxes off of hives for an afternoon, you find when you get a little bit older, it's not the most practical way to go. The box under it is a medium, and most people will use mediums for extracted honey now. And I think that's a good size for most people. That's going to weigh in at about 35 pounds of honey, 30 to 35 pounds. And that's a manageable weight for most people to get off and on. And that is one of the things I think that I think Kim Flodham used to always say, people get into beekeeping for the honey and they get out of it because of the honey. And I never knew what he meant by that for years, but I think that's part of it. That and the fact that it's a sticky thing. If you pull a frame out, you kind of want it to look like this. That's good coverage on your bees. This happens to be a brood frame. I can see some of the cells, but you want to pick your strongest hives for your supers. If they aren't really strong, then you can put a super on them. But and by the way, we get honey off of single deeps all the time during the summer, not so much in the spring. So anyway, spring nectar is the fruit trees, the maples, the oaks, as I mentioned. That's a crab apple tree that was in the yard. This is Cold Springs Orchards, Belchertown. It's my nephew, Adam Conlon, and he worked for me for a few years. He has his own bee operation out in Ohio now. And you can see the dandelions in the grass down there. So the dandelions, when we say we have apple honey, there's a bit of dandelion in there too. This is blueberries, low bush. Honeybees really aren't that great for the high bush ones. They sometimes will come and chew a hole in the side of the high bush because the flowers are longer and the nectaries are down in the bottom of that flower. So they actually can ruin the berries when they do that kind of thing. You can see these are all single deeps and rocks on them. This is up in Heath, Mass. They had about 300 acres, and you can see we have bear fencing that we had to put up around everything up there. They had lots of black bears. We would see them just checking the bees sometimes. They just wander across the fields. But we would add supers to these. Again, I don't know that we ever have gotten blueberry honey off a low bush. They do in Maine, but they certainly have much bigger acreages. And one of the things about anything you're trying to get honey from is you've got to have millions of flowers. You have to have big acreages. This is why we put the electric fences up. I think this is a great picture. I don't know where I got this one. I didn't take it, obviously. Whoever was pretty brave or something. But anyway, in Massachusetts, Western Mass, I don't know if you guys have this plaguing you yet in Rhode Island. I know you occasionally, I'll hear from a friend down there that they had a black bear get into something. But up here, it's become something you just have to do. When I start new people in my beginner class, the first thing I tell them is you're going to have to buy an electric fence if you don't have one. So it's an added expense for sure. But if you don't, you're going to, your beehive is going to get up to a really respectable size. And then one day you're going to go out there and it's going to be in pieces. So you want to have that fence. Here's Adam again. We set up a lot. This is summer pollination. We're out of the fruit. We do apples and blueberries and that type of fruit. We'll, a lot of these orchards also have peaches and plums and things. But then we do summer. And up here, we're big on squash. I think Connecticut does quite a bit of squash too. I don't know if you guys do much of this in Rhode Island. But it gives us access to new locations. If you were to fly over the Connecticut River from Massachusetts border to border, you would see our bee yards set up about every mile on either side of the river all the way up to Vermont. And that's the way a summer looks. We dedicate about 300 of our hives to to squash and vine crops, what I'd say, but summer pollination. And they would be in smaller groups like this. They'd be in sets of 4s or 6s. And it's a good way. We actually get to keep the honey. You can see both of these are already into their second supers. And, we get a lot more honey that way because we've spread them out. You can over graze an area just like you can with livestock by having too many hives in one location. It's not like out west or something where you can put 100 hives in a location, and it exposes them to different plants and stuff. You get benefit as well. And we've also used that to educate our growers about chemical usage and pesticides. And so we've not seen a pesticide issue with our farmers in 20 years. And part of that is they're all tuned right into what we're doing. They're very careful. They work with their employees. So we've managed to reduce our risk by being a little more proactive on understanding what they have to do. And some of the crops, if you're going to do pollination, learn about the crops. Not all crops get sprayed all the time. Squash is a pretty good one. They will use herbicides, but if it's a rainy year, after the third spray, they just plow the fields in. And part of that is it costs so much money for these sprays, the farmers don't want to use them. So when they get to a certain point, they're saying there's no reason to continue because we won't have a crop. So anyway, don't want to get off on that too much. And it's also a good way to expand your apiaries. We also have farms where we keep permanent apiaries year round, and we will pull bees out of there. But in the winter, we might put in 150 hives in the location for the winter. So it's a good way to expand what you're doing if you need new spots. Cucumbers, I put this one up because cucumbers, we used to do cucumber pollination for the pickle factory in Deerfield at one point, and it was owned by 5 of the bigger growers. And we would just put the bees on trailers and move them every week. Sunday nights, usually, you'd hook up the trailer, move them to different fields. We had a whole series of trailers, and we'd get to charge for each move. So we would rent the same bees 4 or 5 times. But the growers never had any complaints about that. And the reason is of course, the comparison there is you see the deformed looking ones that were improperly pollinated. They didn't get enough pollination. It takes repeated visits to make this work. And the ones on the right-hand side are nicely formed, nicely colored, and they're going to taste good too. So, and as you see down below, 40 to 60% bigger yield per acre for just having one strong beehive on that acre. So the farmers really don't complain at all about paying a fee for pollination. And any honey we would keep, although I'll tell you, you will not get honey off of cucumbers. We tried all kinds of ways, but we did better with the brambles around the cucumbers, as they like the raspberries. This squash, we do 5 or 6 different squash. This one squash grower that sells to Big Y stores up here, he typically we'll do 1,000 acres, 1,200 acres, all in different locations. So these groups of 4 hives are spread all over the place. Buckwheat. This is a nice up north here in Western Mass, is that the farmers have started using buckwheat again. They used to use it in the old days. And buckwheat is great because it will outgrow weeds and choke out weeds. And it also can be plowed under to add organic matter to the soil. And they can harvest it for the grain, which they make buckwheat flour with. And we get to keep the honey. And this field right here, a year before this was all just scrub brush. And the farmer came in and they had cleared this thing off the first year. And they wanted to do this with the buckwheat so that they could have organic certification in the first year, not do the 3 years of waiting. So, but you need this to get honey. This is just probably, this picture represents maybe a quarter of the acreage that we were working in. And if you were to go out there in the middle of the day, it was just humming with bees. They love this stuff when it's yielding. Buckwheat tends to yield about 10 a.m. till about 3, 4 in the afternoon. Then it just stops. If it gets too hot too early, it'll stop. Just a picture of bean. I wanted to show you though. If you look right on the middle of the back, you got a mite sitting right there. And I took this picture not knowing that. And I was kind of looking at it to use it in a slideshow like this one day. And I started looking and I said, what is that? And then I realized there was a mite there. Black locust, one of the nice premium tasting honeys that you hardly ever get. It's too early in the season. It gets rained out. If it's too hot, the last days. But when you can get some black locust, it's a lovely honey. Maybe one of the finer honeys up in our New England area. The best honey I ever produced in my life was probably 2004 or 5, and it was comb honey on black locust. It was white cappings, and when you cut into it, it had almost a perfume fragrance. It was so beautiful. And to this day, people still ask me, you got any of that comb honey from black locust? And I haven't produced any of it since 2004 or 5. I try every year, but I haven't been successful. The weather's fighting me all the time. Sweet clover. This stuff is when you talk clover honey, this is what we're talking about. Sweet clover. Out west, it grows everywhere. Get yourself a bag of this stuff and throw it along the roads. And that's what we do up here. I never admit it to the town crew or anything, but I like throwing handfuls out as I drive along. It prefers gravel, crummy growing soil. It's amazing. It will grow in gravel pits, and it will put out nectar for 3 to 4 weeks easily. And it seems to produce under most conditions, but it's a great plant to have your bees go onto, and it's a biennial, so it'll grow the first year and put out seed the second year. So you want to keep dosing it. Thistles are good. This is a Chapman honey plant. It's some kind of French thistle, but it actually puts out a lot of. It has a great taste. We grew probably a 1/4 acre of this at one point, and it flavored our honey so nicely. It was just a nice little additive. Things like jewelweed or touch-me-nots, these tend to put out better nectar, I find, when we have wet seasons. And that's the other thing. If you're keeping a log, you're going to find some seasons are better than others for different flowers. But keep track. Sumac, not the best picture for sumac, but sumac will put out wing stems. We have pretty much grows easy, and it will spread. But this is a long bloomer. It puts out a lot of nectar and pollen, and it'll go for a good month to 6 weeks. Coneflower, lots of stuff here. There's been experiments done at UMass on sunflowers being beneficial to bees as a medicine. They found it worked for certain diseases that bumblebees get. And they've been trying to experiment with honeybees, but I don't know how far along they've gotten. I'm sure we'll hear something. If you're lucky like we are, we have a nursery that grows flowers for people all over the country. And they really don't care if the bees harvest this because they're selling the plants and the seed. So they kind of like this. And I think that's maybe Russian sage or something. But again, our bees just fly over there to it, and it's a great resource. So anyway, just to quickly remind you, build your populations, prevent swarming by giving plenty of room and removing brood if you get too much. Super your hives ahead of the flow so that the bees have plenty of room to store the first nectar right through. I think it was Cornell that did a study years ago that said that we only have about 12 days out of the season that actually put on surplus honey. So you don't want to miss any of the days. The harvesting, packaging, talked about removing the super. This is basswood. Down your way in Rhode Island, I was the I did the honey judging one year for your annual meeting, and it was a great honey contest, by the way. A little overwhelming. You had so many entries. It was pretty impressive. But one of the things I could taste in all this honey, I kept tasting basswood in it. Basswood. Finally, somebody started talking about linden, and they are related species. And evidently, you guys have a lot of that planted around Rhode Island, and it does have a unique taste, and it's a nice taste. But that was in your area, I think, all over Rhode Island. I think it might be one of the telling Rhode Island flavors. This is Dan Barry, who worked for me at one point. We're doing what we call short runs. We do this in the honey house at the place here. We also have a bigger extracting operation for the wildflower. We're using an uncapping knife, which is typical. I want to show you this because this is what most people will be doing. You don't need all the fancy equipment. He's taking off the cappings. Then if you can't get the cappings with that, you take a honey fork and poke the cappings. That box in the middle is that's an extractor. It's radio parallel, spins like a big wheel. You can do a whole box at a time with it. So it comes out the bottom. Over here, you see a bucket being poured into a storage tank. And what we're doing there is we let the honey sit for several days to clarify. And that's how you get it clear. These are just examples from EAS. These aren't mine, but I just wanted to say, you want to have really the best looking honey you can get, and you can get. A couple comments about labeling. If you're selling honey or even giving it away, if it's just honey with nothing in it, that's all you need on there. You need the weight. If you added anything to that honey, you have to include that as an ingredient. And in Massachusetts, it also means you have to bottle all your honey in a certified kitchen that's inspected by the Board of Health annually, and just as it would for any kind of food you would make for public consumption. If it's straight honey, they're a lot more lenient. They do require us to use stainless steel equipment, but if most people have that anyway. You want the contact information has to be on the label. It doesn't need to be your name, but it needs to be your apiary and the town you do business in. Nutritional labeling is not required. There's no trans fats in honey. Country of origin is supposed to be on there, but I think this gets abused all the time. These descriptions, I just wanted to point out to you, when you see honey, it's supposed to mean unadulterated, meaning you didn't add anything to it. You hear stuff all the time about them finding sucrose sugar or cane sugar added to honey. That's adulterated honey. It's illegal. It's against the law. I think it's something you want to pay attention to. And it may include that it's pasteurized and filtered, pressure filtered. Pure means it's just honey, nothing else. Raw doesn't really have a legal definition. We define it as minimal processing with really low heat, below 100 degrees. Organic requires certification, so you can't call it organic. This gets abused all the time. Cold packed or natural, it's just what it sounds like. You spin the honey without it being warm out of the comb. You let it settle for a while, and you just put it in a jar. That's cold packed. It tends to crystallize very quickly, and it's going to take you forever to get a case of honey in a jar with that because it's going to flow so slowly. The varietals, as I said, 51%. So anyway, this was Charles in Ontario, Canada. That's middle guy in the middle is Doug McCrory. He's a friend of mine, and this was an EAS conference, but he was the head bee inspector for Ontario for many years. And just quickly, I just want to show you, this is a professional setup. And these guys were pulling 2 million pounds a season. They thought that was kind of average, And you see, these are all buckets of honey. And this is their automatic bottler, which I kind of thought was fun because I have one just like this, which is kind of funny. you know, because that's what they use. Colors Apiary in Arkansas. These are bees that just came back from almond pollination in California. They were going through them. They would look for signs of problems. They would do splits, make these into new hives. David Coy, he's the youngest of the brothers. He's showing me how you can take plastic foundation, melt beeswax, and just brush it on there, and they will draw it out overnight, which he proved to me that's possible. So we started doing that, put it on strong hives, and they will pull that honey, they'll pull that wax out in a day. So if you're looking to speed up your wax process, try doing that. This is their setup. These are high speed spinners there, and it's almost all automated. So that's and this is something you wouldn't probably know about. Most of us don't ever do this, but that's an actual honey drying setup. So they can basically, those big tanks, they can extract everything. And if they want the level of honey to be, moisture to be lower, they can actually blow this warm air through and it'll just evaporate off the excess. So they do tricks like that. This is a bear that used to watch me when I'd work. I have a whole series of pictures. So anyway, that's kind of my quick spin there. I hope I didn't go too long, hold you up too long. So, but I guess I can take any questions if you have any.
Hey, thanks, Dan. Great talk as always. I want to make a quick comment. I really like one of the things you said earlier, talking about not using fume boards, about being really circumspect with your smoker use when you're extracting honey, that you're putting a real emphasis on the quality of your honey, not just quantity.
That's right.
So I think a lot of times we get in this mode where we think, well, what can we do to increase the quantity of honey? And that's great, because a lot of people get into this because honey is important to them. But the quality, I'm really glad to see you putting such an emphasis on that, because what we can offer especially as local beekeepers to our own communities, is such a unique and precious commodity. We really have to take every step we can to maintain the highest level of quality. So it's heartening to hear you say that. So I want to kick this over to Ed, where he can read whatever questions we have out of the chat. I want to ask one question first, because I know we do have some brand new beekeepers, probably don't even have bees yet. They're in our current bee school. Do you have any specific tips or strategies you would offer someone who's just starting? You know, they don't even have their bees yet. You know, they don't have drawn comb. What would you say to them, as far as like tips or strategies, you know, management decisions going forward, like how to put them on the best foot forward to produce honey, starting from ground zero?
Okay, that's a good question. I think the best advice I give to new beekeepers is be careful what you're expecting, because your first year, your real job is to learn to handle bees. You know, you're not going to produce a ton of honey. You're not going to do all these things that you read about. You're going to learn how to handle bees safely, minimize your stings, and you're going to learn to do the work that a beekeeper has to do with his bees or her bees. And so my advice would be, don't put yourself in a position of thinking you're going to be able to do all these things that are going to take a couple of years to get up to speed on, and discourage yourself. You know, that's what I would tell you I've seen, and I think it's somewhat true, is I see the beekeepers who keep bees for 3 years continue to keep bees. And I see a lot of people who get discouraged quickly because it is challenging. It's not an easy thing. We all know that we keep bees. What I can tell you is I've kept bees since I was 14, and I've made every mistake you can make with bees. And but my love of bees always carried me through. So learn to enjoy your bees, and that would be the starting point. Learn how to handle the bees, and you'll be better off. And then the second year, you can get more into the honey production and the rest of it. So that would be my advice, I guess.
Thank you.
All right, so let's see, we got questions in the chat here. Was a question about, it looks like was answered. How long does honey last? And indefinitely.
Well, you know, the old story of they found it in the Egyptian tombs.
Yeah.
It was still edible. Of course, I don't know who really would try it, but you know, but it does last a long time if it doesn't get moisture.
All right, so we got, somebody wants to hear your thoughts on, this person was told by somebody that they like to drill holes in their honey supers, like ventilation holes in the honey supers, and put screens over them to help the honey dry faster.
Yeah, I know guys who do that. I don't do that. I think with the cost of equipment, I hate to damage it when it's not already doesn't have holes in it. It's just as easy to pop the lid up and give them a little extra air that way. I mean, we will lift the top lids and sort of bring it up over the inner cover and just put a weight on it and leave them like that if it's hot, and it'll evaporate. You know, I don't know that it speeds anything up to put the screens in. I don't know anybody who produces honey commercially who does that. I'll say that. I've never seen that in a commercial operation. And we're talking about guys who process millions of pounds of honey. So it may help, but I'm not sure it's worth damaging your equipment for either.
Okay, so then we have, this person's wondering, trying to figure out the question. I guess is that if you lose any hives over the winter and they have honey in them,
Okay.
is this honey good quality honey for extraction, or
If it hasn't granulated on you, you might be able to get it out. You know, if it's liquid, yeah, we've seen that happen with many people. It's also something that it's always good to know why your bees died. We will reuse that honey on startups for nukes, and we'll use them in the spring to feed hives that are running low. But that's if we know why the hives have died. I would tell you this. I mean, it's a tough time right now because of this darn COVID thing. Because you know, if you have a hive die, one of the things you should do immediately while the bees are as fresh as possible is go out and get a cup of those and put them in a freezer bag and freeze them solid, and then send that sample down to Beltsville, Maryland, and ask them to do a report for you. It's free to you. You have to spend the shipping, but it's a free service to you as a taxpayer. And they give you a nice report. They'll check for viruses. They'll check for mites. They'll check for a lot of things. But what they'll do is they'll rule out a lot of the things that might be a concern. The main things we would worry about when we see a dead hive is we worry about one of the brood diseases, American foul brood, being the worst of them. Fortunately, we don't see a lot of that these days. But one of the things we are seeing more commonly is European foul brood, which is something you can cure, you can fix it. But you would not want to put that comb into a healthy batch of bees necessarily. So you kind of want to do the best job you can of sorting out what happened to those bees before you use it for the next batch you put back in, or as you repopulate the hive. But if you can extract it, it certainly isn't going to be anything that hurts a human. So you can use it for your own use. So.
Okay. When you talked about sweet clover, planting sweet clover, do you prefer to use yellow clover or white?
Good question. I don't know. It seems like I always end up with white, but I don't think it much matters. I think they're both kind of considered the same type of plant. And by the way, if you get them started, they'll keep coming back for quite a while. So,
Mhm.
they're pretty rugged plants, actually.
All right. Can you
Is
say?
Marianne making fun of me back there? I caught you. I know.
I'll say they keep coming back.
That's all.
Yeah.
We were just laughing about clover coming back.
Yeah.
Comes back where you don't want it.
Well, okay. That's some of these plants are going to do that to you. They'll naturalize more than you want.
Yeah, but we love them anyways.
Yeah.
Can you say more about making room during a wet summer so that bees have more room to process nectar?
Oh yeah. Well, if the summers are really wet, they aren't going to have that much nectar. But a lot of this is having the equipment to go the extra distance. When I say we have thousands of supers, let me tell you something. We always seem to run out. And there's a certain point. If you come here now, you'll see that we have literally a couple thousand boxes stacked nice and neat over in the corner, ready to go. And then by July, we can't find anything, and that's where we're using all the stuff that's all beat up, and we were getting ready to junk it, and it ends up back on a hive again. So having that drawn comb available is always your best solution to most things. You give the bees enough empty space, they're going to be able to utilize it, and they'll do what they have to do. Remember, we're just aiding them in what they already do. We aren't really making any of this happen. They're going to do it whether we're there or not. We're just going to maybe help speed it along in some cases. So I would say I don't have a lot of advice. To me, a rainy season is just going to be a crummy year for bees all around. So because they aren't going to get the nutrition, they aren't going to probably get the strength, and you're probably going to end up having to feed them in the fall to keep them going for the following winter. So I would say that's not the best. I don't know any ways to help that. How's that for talking around that question?
There you go. In some of your pictures, it seemed that you don't always have queen excluders.
We don't use them. We never use them. Hardly ever.
But you did in some pictures.
I did in those particular pictures, but we don't use them except for comb honey. The only ones we use them is comb honey, because we obviously don't want to get eggs up. And why we don't do that is we realized that you've heard the expression that the queen excluders are honey excluders. A lot of the old timers like to talk that way,
Yeah.
I guess I'm getting to be an old timer because I'm starting to think the same way. But I don't, most of the time we see very little problem. Once they get through the second super, they form that honey ring at the top, and the brood nest stays below. And once they've established the size of that nest, and by the way, if you put those supers on at the beginning of a nectar flow, you just won't have a problem with eggs, because once they start putting nectar in, the queen isn't going to lay in those frames anyway. And sometimes you'll get a little crescent at the top in the middle where the brood nest extends up into the super. You just let those hatch out, and when they hatch out, they'll get filled with honey. So we found that there wasn't much need to use excluders for that purpose, so we don't. And I would tell any of you that you can probably just do what I just suggested, and you'll find you won't have a problem, or very little.
Okay. All right, let's see. This person is going to go foundationless in their supers. So you have any tricks for getting the bees to draw out the honey supers faster in foundationless frames?
Okay, yeah, I don't know that I have any tricks. I know that you know, if you can do that with if you had an established colony, I think one of the mistakes a lot of people make is they try to do this with packages of bees. And you know, it seems to me you really need a lot of bees to get that festooning down from the top where the bees are creating the wax and the comb. And I think, you know, we have tried it on occasion, and what we would do is we would put in regular comb to either side of a frame we're trying to draw down, just so they draw it down straight or straighter. Because I always found when I tried doing it with just straight frames, they would cross comb it a lot of the time, and you'd end up with a mess. But the advice I'd give is you need a lot of young bees. Those are the ones that produce the wax, and you need to feed them, feed them, feed them. You know, and even if you're going to use packages, I would tell you this: feed them for about 2 or 3 days in the package so that they're all loaded up with syrup. And we know that when bees are swarming, one of the things they're doing is they're carrying full loads of honey in their honey stomachs, and that causes the wax glands to produce more. So it's one reason a swarm is so good at drawing it down, which, by the way, would probably be my third suggestion. If you can catch a swarm and throw it in there, you're going to find they'll draw wax really fast. Problem is you don't always have that option. So.
Okay. And now let's see, we'll start your next talk with the question, what do you do to control Varroa?
Oh, Varroa. Well, we start by using bees that do a lot of that for us, which is our Russian stock. Our long range goal has always been to have bees that handle the mites on their own. And you know, nobody's gotten there yet, but we've made progress, and we do have years where we skip treatments altogether. What we will use, I just did I don't know if you got my little, I always write a beekeeper newsletter to people who are looking to buy bees from us. And I sort of bare my soul in a way. I just sort of say, these are all the things I did. And some of it's admitting to some mistakes, but also I figure it's an honest appraisal from somebody who makes a living at it. People need to know that things don't always work the way you hope they will. But we actually tried 3 or 4 different treatments and compared them. And we were somewhat surprised at how little effect some of them were having on the mite drop. And so when we've used things like oxalic vapor, one of the guys who works with me, I don't recommend that to everybody because it is somewhat dangerous if you don't have the proper safety gear. You need a good respirator. You should protect yourself. It's an acid, and you certainly don't want to breathe it. And any of these treatments are. We use some amitraz, which is of course a pesticide. That was effective, but I wouldn't recommend amitraz because I don't believe putting pesticides into a hive is necessarily going to help you with your bees in the long run either. So I would recommend you go with either the organic acids, the formic, except I'm saying that with the knowledge that we used formic treatments on about 50 colonies this year, and I was not happy with the results. We really did not knock the bees or the mites down to a level that was acceptable in the hives that we were worried about. So I think, you're going to have to be talking to people in your area, talk to people in your club, see what success they're having, and see what kind of protocols they're using. I've always believed one of the things that we used to do, and I think I got this from Rick Rowe or somebody, I remember, is we used to use Thymol, but we'd use it in the early spring before the mite levels really got going. And that would knock the mites, the reproductive mites that overwintered, down enough that you wouldn't even have a problem in August or later in the season. So we would use it, and that's a much more benign treatment than a lot of them. So, you know, what we really do is, you know, you heard me talking about pulling brood and stuff. What we're doing is we interrupt the brood cycle all the time with our bees. And we do that when we do splits. We do that when we start nukes. And when you interrupt the brood for 2 weeks, if you have bees that are very good at removing mites from other workers, that gives them the opportunity to lower those mite levels naturally. And so that's probably the thing we do all the time, is we try to work with cultural remedies when we can. And that would be something I would suggest you learn to do. You know, there are other things that work. Drone trapping works if you do it right. And you don't have to get into a lot of chemicals with that, but it does require a certain amount of micromanagement. And you know, typically we will allow the bees that have mite levels high. We won't touch them unless it really looks like it's across the board. In other words, if we go into a yard that has 100 hives and we see that there's a lot of samples that are really high, we'll treat the whole yard. But if there's only a few, we probably just leave them, because they aren't really bees we want to reproduce anyway. So if they don't make it through the winter, so be it. But I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that, because if you read my newsletter, what I was saying was I'm not real happy with any of the current available treatments. I don't think they do what they are promising. And it could have been how we applied them. Maybe we didn't do it properly, but I field tested like the NOD products before they came out. Our apiary was one of the field testing apiaries to approve that product. And I can tell you it worked pretty good in those days. But I didn't see the same results with the formic treatment that I once did. So, you know, we'll be talking to other commercial beekeepers. I would tell you though, the thing with the commercial guys right now is most of them do use the Amatraz, and I'm not really going to go there as a normal treatment. I don't care for the idea. I think, again, to get back to Scott's comment, I always question the residuals that might end up in your honey too. And so I'm much more likely to lean towards the organic alternatives when I can.
Hey, Dan, can I jump in for a second? I just read the Russian honeybee book that Tom Rindra wrote. As I mentioned in your introduction, you are the former president of the Russian Bee Breeders Association. I just want to point out there, because again, we do have a lot of new beekeepers here.
Yeah.
I believe your operation at Warm Colors is 100% Russian, correct?
Yeah.
So your decisions as far as varroa control are going to be targeted toward Russian bees, which have their own built-in mechanisms. That book, for anyone, by the way, who hasn't read it, it's coming to the RIBA library. I dropped it off recently. It's really fascinating, talking about all the natural, biological methods that Russian bees have to control varroa reproduction, like a multitude of mechanisms. Most of us in Rhode Island are not using Russian bees. So you need to
I would just add this, Scott, it's worth reading that, because all bees have some level of those things in them. It's just that the Russians seem to have more of it right now. So that's so if you want to understand what the bees do naturally, any bee, I think Tom did a good job of explaining that in his book.
It's a great book. I mean, the way he took all those various studies and just broke them down in a very concise and clear, like a lot of that stuff I might have read like dribs and drabs over the years, but to have it all in one place and to see it just laid out so clearly, I was like, wow, this is, I mean, it's really like a well put together document.
Well, yeah, and Tom's my technical advisor. So he still works with our board of, board of directors, and he's a wealth of experience and expertise. So we'd like to see him write more books about bee breeding, but he's been fishing a lot lately. So.
All right. So the last question, and I think you answered it, but we'll throw it out anyways. Person noticed that a lot of your pictures, you were using 3 deep boxes for brood boxes, and wondering what your current brood box configuration is.
Typically, we will use a lot of single deeps in the summer with honey supers over them. And part of that, what you're seeing is it's because we're moving those for pollination. So we might add a deep to the ones we're going to let sit for a while. Apple orchards and things like that, where we're in and out in 10 days, where you're running a deep, we call them 1.5s, a deep with a medium super on top. And the medium super is always just drawn comb empty. So we're hoping they'll put up some honey. And we go in with 8 frames of brood in each of those deeps. So they become explosive in a very short time, population. So the first thing we have to do when we pull those out is either add a second deep, or we split them again into nukes or into more hives. But typically the configuration changes with the needs. If we're doing comb honey, we start with 2 deeps. We build them up really strong, and then we take a deep away, put an excluder on top of that bottom deep, and we stack up 2 or 3 comb supers on top of that. And we force all those bees to go up and just start drawing wax right away. So it really depends on, all of these things vary. For the average person, I would suggest you run 2 deeps as a brood nest, and you add supers and take them off as you need to.
Okay, well, that looks like that's it.
That was good.
I thank you, Dan. That was a great talk.
Yeah. Dan, thank you. Ed, thank you for setting this up as always. I mean, just a wealth of information there. Yeah, I don't know what else to say.
Hopefully everyone, if you are up this way, a good number of you people in Rhode Island have been up here for bees many times. So I know a bunch of guys down that way. And I hope all this COVID stuff gets under control so we can start seeing each other in person. I much prefer doing these things with live bees where I can actually show you something. And it's a lot easier for me, and I think it's a lot easier for most beekeepers if you can do a show and tell. Let's talk about it and let's look at it, So
Yeah.
I prefer that. And hopefully any of you traveling this way in the summer, stop by and say hello. I'll let you try to show you around the place.
Thank you, Dan.
All right, thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
Hi, Dan.
I'll be in touch about March, Dan.
Okay, take care.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, good night, Rhode Island beekeepers.
Good
Good night,
night.
everybody.
Night.